What would you do if your HOA slapped you with a $100,000 fine for having the wrong shade of beige on your front door? Sounds ridiculous, right? I thought so too, until I moved into what I believed was a peaceful, upscale neighborhood, only to find myself locked in a battle against the most corrupt, power-hungry HOA president I'd ever encountered. It all started the day I closed on my new home. I wasn't just another homeowner looking for a fresh start. I had spent years quietly building a real estate empire, flipping properties, investing in both residential and commercial spaces, and amassing a fortune that I had no interest in flaunting. I liked keeping a low profile, which is exactly why I chose this neighborhood. It had all the charm of suburban tranquility, tree-lined streets, pristine homes, and a community that seemed well-maintained but not overly intrusive. I thought I was buying into peace. What I got instead was a dictatorship. I had barely pulled into my driveway for the first time when a woman in an ill-fitting blazer marched up to my car, clipboard in hand, her lips pursed in a tight scowl. She looked me over like I was an intruder trespassing on sacred ground. "You're the new homeowner?" she asked, her voice clipped and authoritative. I raised an eyebrow. "Yeah. That's me. I'm Karen Thompson, president of the HOA," she announced, as if that title held the same weight as mayor or senator. "We have rules here." She thrust a thick packet into my hands. "You'll want to read this carefully. We take compliance very seriously." I glanced down at the booklet. 40 pages of rules and regulations. I had lived in HOA communities before, some good, some bad, but I had never seen one that required what looked like a legal dissertation just to own a house. Still, I nodded politely. "Got it." Karen's eyes narrowed as if she didn't like my tone. She lingered for a moment, scanning me like she was trying to find something, anything, wrong with me. Finally, she sniffed, turned on her heel, and walked away without another word. It took less than a week for the first violation notice to appear in my mailbox. My driveway's concrete was the wrong shade of gray. I actually laughed when I read it, thinking it had to be some kind of clerical mistake. But then another notice came. $500 fine for having my trash bins visible from the street. Then another. My mailbox was 2 inches taller than the HOA's preferred standard. The infractions were piling up, and I hadn't even finished unpacking my boxes. Something was off. Talking to my neighbors only confirmed my suspicions. Karen wasn't just strict, she was running the HOA like a full-blown extortion racket. The stories I heard made my blood boil. Walter Dawson, an elderly veteran down the street, had nearly lost his home because Karen kept fining him for unapproved lawn ornaments. Emily Brooks, a single mother, had been fined over $10,000 for putting up seasonal decorations, eventually forcing her to move. The kicker? Karen's own relatives had bought Emily's foreclosed home at half its market value. It was no accident. It was a system, a carefully crafted scam designed to force people out and profit off their losses. And now, Karen had set her sights on me. What she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that she had just picked a fight with the wrong man. A week later, I opened my mailbox to find an envelope marked urgent in bold red letters. The paper inside was thick, official-looking, and stamped with the HOA's insignia. I unfolded it, scanning the contents, expecting another petty violation. But this time, Karen had outdone herself. Total due, $100,000. I blinked. That couldn't be right. My eyes darted over the list of supposed infractions. Each one was more absurd than the last. Grass too green, artificial appearance, disrupting natural uniformity. Windows reflecting too much sunlight, potential hazard to drivers. Front door color not approved, deviation from HOA standard beige. Mailbox 2 inches too tall, again. This wasn't just overreach. This was an outright shakedown. For a moment, I just stood there, gripping the fine notice, my pulse steady but my jaw tightening. This wasn't just about money. It wasn't even about control. Karen was sending a message. Pay up or get out. Fine. Message received. But she had no idea who she was dealing with. I stormed over to the HOA office, located inside the pristine, overpriced community clubhouse that my dues supposedly maintained. Inside, behind a desk that I now suspected was paid for with stolen HOA funds, sat Karen, lazily flipping through a magazine. She didn't even look surprised to see me. In fact, she smirked. "Mr. Carter," she said, feigning politeness. "Hear about your violations?" I dropped the paperwork onto her desk. "You think I'm going to pay this?" She barely glanced at it before shrugging. "If you don't, we'll place a lien on your home. You wouldn't be the first." I leaned in slightly, watching her confidence ooze through every word. This wasn't just policy, it was personal. She was enjoying this. "You're seriously trying to extort me for $100 grand?" I asked, my voice even. "It's not extortion," she said smoothly. "It's the rules. If you don't like them, you're free to move." That was the moment I knew exactly how this was going to play out. She thought she had all the power. She thought I was just another homeowner who would either pay up or back down. I smiled. "You really have no idea who I am, do you?" She scoffed, waving a dismissive hand. "I don't care who you are. The HOA has full authority here." I didn't argue. I didn't threaten. I simply turned around and walked out. She thought she had won. She thought she had another victim trapped in her web. What she didn't realize was that she had just declared war on the wrong man. Most people would have reacted immediately, maybe called a lawyer, tried to argue their way out of it, or begged for leniency. But I wasn't most people. Karen expected a fight right then and there. She wanted me to get angry, to lose my temper, to threaten her. That would have played right into her hands. HOA boards like this thrived on homeowners who panicked under pressure. They'd get tangled in legal battles, buried under bureaucracy, broke before they could even make a move. I wasn't about to fall for that. Instead, I played it cool. Let her believe she'd already won. Meanwhile, I started working behind the scenes. Step 1, follow the money. HOAs like this didn't run on intimidation alone. They ran on financial corruption. If Karen was abusing her power, there had to be a paper trail. I started talking to neighbors, casual conversations, nothing too obvious. Some were too scared to say much, but others? Once they realized I wasn't afraid of Karen, the floodgates opened. One after another, the stories piled up. Walter Dawson, the elderly veteran, told me he had paid over $155,000 in HOA fines last year alone. For what? Community maintenance fees that never resulted in a single improvement. Jessica Miller, a young mother down the street, had spent months trying to get a basic wooden fence approved, only for Karen to reject it 3 times before approving the exact same design for her personal friend. Emily Brooks, the single mom who lost her house. Karen had personally blocked her from selling it, citing compliance violations. When she couldn't pay the ridiculous fines, the house was foreclosed, and mysteriously bought at half price by an LLC linked to Karen's cousin. By the end of my conversations, it was obvious, this wasn't just an overzealous HOA. This was a racket. A few phone calls to my real estate connections got me access to property records, financial filings, and legal experts. I dug deeper. Within 48 hours, I had a detailed report in my hands. Karen and her inner circle had been funneling fines into private accounts, disguising the transactions under fake community improvement projects. The foreclosed homes? Karen personally acquired 4 properties in the last 2 years, all of them through forced foreclosures, all of them resold to shell companies connected to her family. I sat back in my office, flipping through the pages, letting it all sink in. I had enough evidence to ruin her. But I wasn't just going to expose her. I was going to take everything. The beauty of a corrupt system is that it always leaves a trail. And Karen, drunk on power and arrogance, had left plenty of evidence behind. I spent the next few days working quietly, gathering the final pieces I needed. I didn't just want to bring Karen down, I wanted to crush her entire operation beyond repair. The key to that? Ted Palmer, the HOA treasurer. Ted wasn't like Karen. He wasn't power-hungry, nor did he get any satisfaction from enforcing fines. He was weak, a man who had been swept into Karen's orbit and stayed there out of convenience or fear. But weak links are easy to break. I found him sitting alone at a diner just outside the neighborhood, nervously stirring his coffee. He looked up when I slid into the seat across from him, his face pale like he already knew why I was there. I didn't know how deep it went, he stammered before I even had to say a word. His hands trembled as he set his coffee down. I thought she was just strict. But when you showed up, I started looking at the numbers again. It's bad. It's really bad. How bad? I leaned in, already knowing the answer but wanting to hear him admit it. Ted swallowed hard. She's stolen hundreds of thousands from the HOA fund. We approve projects on paper, but the money, he shook his head. It just disappears. It's been going on for years. I didn't blink. Where does it go? Ted exhaled sharply. Mostly to personal accounts, hers, a few board members, and her family's shell companies. That's how they buy up the foreclosed homes. The money reinvested into the community? Fake. Landscaping? Fake. Security upgrades? Fake. He let out a bitter laugh. Hell, even the clubhouse renovations were fake. We just billed the HOA for improvements that never happened. Bingo. He looked at me then, desperation creeping into his eyes. If this comes out, I'm screwed, aren't I? That depends. I tapped the folder in front of me, the one filled with every financial discrepancy I had uncovered. If you go down with Karen, yeah. But if you help me bring her down, maybe you get to walk away with just a bruised reputation. Ted swallowed, then nodded slowly. What do you need me to do? Perfect. Now that I had a key insider, I moved on to step 2, taking control of the neighborhood itself. Karen ruled through fear and fines, but she never expected someone like me to start buying her kingdom out from under her. Using a series of shell companies, I started quietly acquiring properties from homeowners who were desperate to escape Karen's tyranny. Some were already in the process of moving, others were on the brink of foreclosure, and the moment they realized they could get out, fast, clean, and with a fair price, they took the deal. By the end of the week, I owned over 40% of the homes in the HOA. That was the kill shot. You see, most HOAs operate under a majority rule system. Whoever holds the most property controls the votes. And now? That was me. Karen didn't know it yet, but she wasn't the boss anymore. I let her think she was still in control, still untouchable. Then, when the moment was right, I called an emergency HOA meeting. She walked into the clubhouse like a queen arriving at her coronation, flanked by her loyalists, board members who had spent years backing her every decision. She had no idea she was walking into an ambush. I sat at the head of the table, hands folded, a stack of documents in front of me. Karen frowned, looking around. What's the meaning of this? I smiled. We need to discuss some financial concerns regarding the HOA. Her smirk returned. You don't have the authority to call this meeting. Oh, but I do, I said, sliding a folder across the table. I own 40% of the properties in this neighborhood. That makes me the majority property holder. And under HOA bylaws, that means I can call for a vote on anything. The color drained from her face. She grabbed the folder, flipping through the pages, her hands shaking as she read the list of every home I had acquired. You can't do this," she whispered. I ignored her. I opened my folder, pulled out the financial reports, and laid them on the table. According to HOA records, residents have been paying thousands in fines every year, I said, my voice calm, controlled. Yet there's no actual record of where that money has gone. Landscaping? Never happened. Security upgrades? Non-existent. But you know what did happen? I slid another set of documents forward, bank statements. Money transfers. Payments leading directly from HOA accounts to Karen's personal accounts and the shell companies owned by her family. You've been stealing from the community, I said. For years. The room was dead silent. Even her most loyal board members looked uneasy now. Karen's face turned red. This is nonsense. You don't have the authority to look at HOA finances. I leaned back in my chair, watching her crumble. Actually, I do. As the largest property owner, I have full rights to access HOA financial records. And what I found? Well, let's just say it's enough to put you behind bars. Her hands clenched into fists. This is illegal. You're lying. I pressed play on my phone. A recording of Ted's voice filled the room. Karen's been running this place like a dictatorship. She fines people into foreclosure, then her friends buy the houses cheap. It's a scam. I didn't know how deep it went, but she controls everything. Karen lunged across the table, trying to grab my phone. You can't record that. That's illegal, she shrieked. I pulled it back just in time. Actually, in this state, it's perfectly legal to record a conversation as long as one party consents. And, well, I smirked, I consented. Her board members were staring at her now, shifting uncomfortably in their seats. The HOA vice president, Mark Reynolds, cleared his throat. He had been quiet throughout the meeting, but now, he finally spoke. I vote to remove Karen Thompson as HOA president, he said. Karen's head snapped toward him, her expression pure fury. You wouldn't dare. I second that vote, Ted muttered, unable to look at her. One by one, the remaining board members raised their hands. Unanimous. Karen shot up from her chair, her entire body shaking. You can't do this. I built this HOA. You. I stood up, meeting her glare. It's over, Karen. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. She had just lost everything. Karen was the kind of person who didn't go down without a fight. She had spent years ruling over this neighborhood like a queen, and she wasn't about to let someone like me strip her of her power without a final, desperate attempt to claw it back. The moment the vote to remove her as HOA president was finalized, I knew retaliation was coming. What I didn't expect was just how dirty she was willing to play. The very next morning, I stepped outside to find another HOA violation notice taped to my door. This time, it wasn't a bill for a few $100s or a vague warning about compliance. It was an itemized list of 7 new violations, all supposedly committed overnight. My house disrupted the aesthetic harmony of the neighborhood. My car was an improper model for the community. My hedges were exactly 1.5 inches too tall. My mailbox was positioned at an incorrect angle. Each one came with a fine, and when I added them up, the total came to $75,000. I laughed out loud. This was Karen's version of a temper tantrum. She had lost her official position, but she still had loyalists on the board, and she was using them to try and weaponize the HOA against me one last time. I expected as much. What I didn't expect was what came next. Karen wasn't just throwing bogus fines my way, she was actively trying to rebuild her power. That afternoon, I heard whispers from neighbors that she had started meeting in secret with some of her most devoted supporters. A handful of HOA diehards who still believed in her rule were forming what they called an unofficial HOA committee. They started patrolling the neighborhood like some kind of self-appointed security force, issuing fake violation notices, knocking on doors, and trying to scare residents into believing Karen was still in charge. At first, it was almost comical, middle-aged suburbanites acting like enforcers, claiming that the previous board meeting had been illegitimate and that Karen still had authority. But it didn't stop at intimidation. One evening, I came home to find 3 cars blocking my driveway. Karen's supporters stood beside them, arms crossed, smug expressions on their faces. "You're trespassing," one of them announced. "You're in violation of HOA policy." I raised an eyebrow. "That's funny. Because I own this neighborhood." They hesitated, exchanging glances, and for a moment, I thought they might back down. But Karen had drilled fear and obedience into them for years, and some of them still clung to the illusion of her power. I could have called the cops right then and there. I could have had them removed, filed harassment charges, made their lives miserable. But I didn't need to. Instead, I simply pulled out my phone, held it up, and hit record. "Go ahead," I said. "Tell me how I'm trespassing on my own property." That was all it took. A few of them grumbled under their breath, but one by one, they got back in their cars and drove off. Karen's fake HOA was crumbling just as fast as she had built it. But she still wasn't done. A week later, I found out she had taken the fight to the courts. Karen had filed a lawsuit against me. The claims were absurd. She alleged that I had illegally acquired properties through deception, coerced the HOA board into voting against her, and violated my contractual obligations as a homeowner. It was nonsense, but that wasn't the point. The point was to drag me into a legal battle, waste my time, and drain my resources. Unfortunately for Karen, I had more resources than she could ever dream of. I barely had to lift a finger before my attorneys tore her case apart. Within days, her lawsuit was dismissed as frivolous. But she had already made one fatal mistake. By filing a lawsuit, she had put herself back into the public eye. Karen had spent years ruling this neighborhood through fear and secrecy, but now, her corruption was being exposed on a much bigger scale. She thought she could paint herself as a victim, but I had evidence. And I knew exactly how to use it. I made a few calls. Within 48 hours, the story was everywhere. HOA president accused of corruption and fraud. Homeowners forced into foreclosure by fake HOA fines. Real estate investor uncovers neighborhood extortion scheme. Karen had spent her career hiding in the shadows, but now, the entire city knew her name. I sat back and watched the panic set in. Karen tried to go on the defensive, giving an interview to a local news station, tears in her eyes, claiming that she had been unfairly ousted and that she had only ever tried to protect the neighborhood. But it was too late. With all the financial documents, the witness statements, the legal records I had compiled, she had no defense. She was finished. Even her own allies started turning against her. Ted, the former treasurer, publicly confessed to how Karen had manipulated HOA funds. 2 other board members admitted that they had signed off on illegal foreclosures under her orders. And now, even the local authorities were taking an interest. Karen's past financial dealings were being investigated for fraud, embezzlement, and even racketeering. She had gone from queen of the HOA to a disgraced scam artist under legal scrutiny. But she still wasn't done. Her last desperate move? Coming after me personally. Late one night, I stepped outside to find all 4 of my tires slashed. A few days later, my security cameras caught 2 of her loyalists throwing garbage all over my lawn. Then, the final attempt, someone filed a false complaint with the city, claiming I was running an illegal business out of my home. It was pathetic. It was desperate. And it was the last straw. Because I had one final card left to play. And this time, I wasn't just going to beat Karen. I was going to erase her entire existence from this neighborhood. Karen thought she could break me. She thought she could keep throwing fines, filing lawsuits, and sending her goons to intimidate me until I finally caved. But all she had done was dig her own grave deeper. It was time to end this. For good. I called another emergency HOA meeting, but this time, the entire neighborhood was invited. Homeowners packed into the clubhouse, some curious, some still hesitant, but most angry and fed up. They had spent years living under Karen's rule, paying into an HOA that did nothing but punish them, and now they were ready to hear the truth. I stood at the front of the room and laid everything out: the fraudulent finances, the fake fines, the foreclosures, the stolen money. I told them about the shell companies, the rigged violations, and how Karen had used her power to steal from them, not protect them. And when I was finished, I took a deep breath and made my final move. "I'm proposing a vote," I said, scanning the room. "Not just to remove Karen, but to dissolve the HOA completely. No more fines. No more bogus rules. No more Karen." For a moment, silence. Then, applause. A wave of relief and excitement spread through the crowd as, one by one, residents raised their hands. It was unanimous. Just like that, the HOA was dead. Karen sat in the back of the room, pale, shaking, gripping the table like it was the only thing keeping her from collapsing. She opened her mouth to protest, but there was nothing left to say. She had lost everything. Within weeks, the lawsuits piled up. Karen was being investigated for fraud and embezzlement. Her bank accounts were frozen, her home, the one she had stolen, seized by the state. And then came the final blow, her arrest. I made sure I was outside when the cops showed up. I watched as they put her in cuffs, her face red with rage, screaming that this was all my fault. I smiled. "No, Karen," I said, watching as they shoved her into the back of the squad car. "You did this to yourself." After that, the neighborhood transformed overnight. No more pointless fines. No more ridiculous rules. No more fear. Instead of an HOA, we formed a simple neighborhood association, one that actually worked for homeowners, not against them. I even pitched in for real improvements: new parks, security cameras, a community space. All without forcing anyone to pay insane dues. Karen? The last I heard, she was bouncing between cheap motels, blacklisted from real estate, struggling to find work. Her name was ruined, her empire gone, and no one was coming to save her. I sat back on my porch one evening, watching the sunset over my now peaceful, HOA-free neighborhood, and I couldn't help but smile. Justice had been served. So, what do you think? Have you ever felt powerless against an HOA, or someone like Karen? Share your experiences below. Let's see who had it worse.